academic success should not require abandoning our cultural identity. Reclaiming Indigenous knowledge in Kisii classrooms. So my problem that I looked at mostly was a colonial divide in education, the big divide, the school and the community. In the schools, we see English as the medium of education, textbooks that drive context, and the textbooks are generally based on Western epistemologies. We have abstract theories that are in class and disconnected from the daily lives of the students. But generally, when you look at the community itself and how they educate their kids, as in formal education, we have oral traditions and storytelling, apprenticeship based, where the students are learning from watching their parents doing in the classrooms, and not in the classrooms at home. You have the collective problem solving. You have those hands-on practical knowledge that they earn. Everything that they do is embedded in their culture. So research context, this was done in Kisii, Kenya. So what came out of the study? I found 9 elements that support learning. Language, because I group language as part of culture, language, heritage, oral traditions, local stems were the prominent ones. And then rites of passage, values, beliefs, and rewards and punishment. The last one was practical learning over theory, which, as I said in the beginning, community-based learning by watching and learning by doing. So cultural breaches that stood out. Let's look at what the teacher said. If you cook the ugali, it is soft, you could be sent back to your parents for retraining. Like cultural history and social studies to family roles, cultural expectations, community training. What this really says is how the community raises their kids. If you're a young girl, by the time you get to a certain age, it is expected that the community or your parents or your family would have trained you to the point where you are ready to take on the role in which you are getting into adulthood. So the rite of passage allows that by the time you move from birth to marriage, you are ready. Every stage in life is preparing you for the next. And that's why they have initiation rites in some of these tribes, because the initiation rites is not just about cutting off the skin, it's about preparing the child from one stage to the other. In this particular case, the teacher was explaining that if you send a child to marriage that is not ready, the family of that child can send you back if the child is not ready. And it is expressed in this ugali. Ugali is like fufu for those of us that are from Western Africa. It's fufu. If you go and you cannot cook fufu, that's like the basic thing that a child is supposed to know. You will be sent back so that you can go learn how to cook fufu before you come back to your marriage. So these are just some of the key things that stood out. In language, the kids wanted use of local language should be more in the classrooms because it allows them to understand better what is going on in the classroom, like that translation, that coding, that code switching really helps them understand better. And another thing that really stood out to me in the local STEM area, because this was generally a balance between general knowledge and STEM knowledge that I was working on. And one thing that one of the teachers was saying is that in classrooms, sometimes you tell a child something like 2 divided by 2, the child will say 0. And in that discussion in the focus group, all the other teachers started to laugh because they were all like, students don't know anything, you need to send them back home to do something else. Because of all of that, one of the teachers said, let's freeze. When you say 2 divided by 2, what is the student thinking? The student is thinking, I have 2 things, and I'm going to divide these 2 things by 2 people. There is nothing left. So mocking the child for saying 0 is wrong. So you have to really stand back and consider where the student is coming from. How are they thinking? Are they thinking about this? Are they thinking based on what is common in their community? Or are you expecting a textbook response to everything? Students also really cared about oral traditions. They really would like a mixture of storytelling in their classrooms, especially when they are bored or when subjects are really hard. Maybe use oral traditions or stories to teach that particular lesson. In this study, the teacher used a catapult to teach because the students were not understanding centripetal force, but they had to use a catapult to teach. Really helped. A gap that I found in the study, the cultural expert had such a large difference between the students. You could see administrators were a bit closer, but cultural experts and students really stood apart in their opinion on how education should be performed both in the schools and at home. And this is what my images look like for epistemic network analysis. Just explaining this can take us another 30 minutes. So just know that the points that I looked at earlier, the top points, these are all what a cultural expert said, or you can see from the notes, which are the strongest. Process is one of the strongest notes that appeared for all the participants. As you can see, this is the strongest for the students. And that's how I was able to determine quantitatively how qualitative data was mapping up. 4 findings that stood out: language and formal education for students, performance, rewards and punishment. They do not want to be punished, they want rewards instead. Practically in daily life, is education practical for them? And then for heritage and ancestral practices, the cultural experts really emphasized that. Also really showed the gap, as you've already seen. All groups valued integration of culture as a whole, whether it's language, whether it's storytelling, whether it's values and beliefs. All of them really valued that in education. So how learning takes place emerged as the most densely connected node across all stakeholders' networks, suggesting a shared emphasis on experiential community embedded pedagogy. I use post-colonial theory, cultural relevant pedagogy, situated cognitive theory, and social learning theory. 2 practical frameworks was developed from this. It is the cultural integration and augmentation framework that really says let's pull from what the child already know and the community in order to enhance their learning. And then when we use learning that is from another culture, we use the transfer, adoption, or adaptation of universal principles. Things that we consider universal, we should not really just adopt it in a community. Before we take a belief, we can say beliefs are universal, but the belief in one system is different from another. So we need to be very careful to adapt or adopt it in a way that does not compromise the identity of the culture that we are working with. So we have seen contributions. We demonstrate that for theory, we demonstrate that indigenous knowledge are effective forms of pedagogy, expand empirical scope of cultural relevant pedagogy. For curriculum, a way to strengthen the K-12 curriculum by integrating local knowledge into schools and teaching. For teachers, reframe teachers as cultural connectors, equip them to bridge school and community knowledge. Policy call for formal collaboration between schools and community elders, with 98% of participants endorsing both institutional change and cultural integration. So as a reclaiming indigenous knowledge in Kisii looks like affirming students' rights to see themselves in what they study, repositions teachers as cultural connectors, offers a model of education grounded in identity, practice, and community wisdom, challenging the dominance of imported pedagogy.